Donald Trump's presidency hit the 100-day mark this past week. That's long been the milestone used to measure how a new president is doing. We've heard lots of people weighing in over the past week. How would you grade his first 100 days?
I think I'm trying to objectively view it. And I think we all get caught up in the noise, the tweets, the statements that are made that are not factual, and the media and the public, the people who are opposed to Trump jump on that stuff, right? The people who support him are saying it doesn't make any difference, it's not literal, it's a concept. So I think we need to step back and analyze what he's actually accomplished. So he got a Supreme Court judge appointed, significant accomplishment. He has issued, I think, more executive orders than any president in his first 30 days, or very close to the maximum number. Now, a lot of those are not particularly meaningful because they just direct agencies to review things. They don't actually take action. On the flip side of it, he's had 2 immigration bans knocked out. He's been unable to pass health care reform. They struggled to get an appropriations bill passed, and in fact didn't. They just have a continuing resolution now that they're going to put on the floor through September. So I think he's done a lot of things that I think are symbolic. I don't think they've achieved many of the significant issues that he talked about.
What about the global threats? How's he handling them?
Those I would give him a B on. I think he's done some interesting and innovative things. Again, that gets denigrated by the tweets and things that he says. But I think that what has happened over time, you've seen Bannon get shifted out of the mainstream. You've got McMaster there. You've got Mattis. You've got Tillerson. You've got some people who are competent, are smart, and I think he's beginning to listen to them. So I'm relatively comfortable that that's going to sort of play along. The question, my only real fear is North Korea, because I don't know how the president would respond to some provocation by North Korea, whether he would be measured in his response or whether he would react. But even in that case, I think that those folks who are now running the national security apparatus have a good handle and a good set of controls.
His first few weeks in office, Mr. Trump was very critical of China and accused them of manipulating their currency. But after meeting with President Xi and with the crisis in North Korea, he's been much more supportive of the Chinese government, apparently hoping to convince them to intervene. That said, is currency manipulation still a major problem?
It's clearly a major problem. And I sent a chart over to you that maybe you'll show to our viewers that demonstrates that the Chinese currency was actually declining well before he got elected. He attributes it to his mere running. But again, he said, they're a manipulator. I'm going to declare them a manipulator. And then within the last 2 weeks, he said, no, they're not a currency manipulator. Well, the fact of the matter is they are. I understand that he's playing to the Chinese because he needs help in North Korea. Makes sense to me. But that doesn't change the fact that that's what they're doing. And if you look at what really has happened, and I'm going to sort of broaden this a little bit to go into the basic premise behind his attack on NAFTA, and that is the loss of manufacturing jobs. The loss of manufacturing jobs really started in about 2001 and ran through 2010. We lost a little over 5 million jobs in that period of time. The significant event of 2001 was China joining the WTO, which gave them access to many more markets than they had before, which therefore opened up their ability to produce and sell more. They enhanced it by manipulating the currency. But we really lost those jobs in that period of time. So you lost about 3.5 million, 2001 to 2007, and then you lost another about 1.5 million as a result of the financial crisis. But the big job loss is unrelated to NAFTA in that analysis, because it was enacted in '94. That's 7 years later you start to see this big decline. The real event, in my view, is the Chinese joining the WTO.
The temporary spending bill that Congress approved this week that you mentioned to keep the government up and running restores many of the more severe budget cuts that Mr. Trump proposed to Planned Parenthood, the arts, public broadcasting. Did many of his cuts simply go too far?
Well, I think that most moderate Republicans and Democrats looked at this and saw this as an attempt to punish people, and that really negatively impacted those more moderate folks, and they said this is not going to happen. And we saw it in the short-term CR, we saw it in the long-term CR. He didn't get funding for the wall, even though last night he said he did. But in fact, there's restrictions in the bill on what that $1.5 billion can be used for, and I think sensibly used, in the sense that they want to put more technology on the border. That, I think, is a real good idea.
Was that politically smart not to go to the mat over the wall to shut down the government?
Oh, I think that, yes. I think that has not worked out well for the Republicans the last few times they did it. In '94 with under Gingrich, and then recently 2012, 2013 did not work out well. Smart move.
What about his tax plan that he unveiled last week? It's missing a lot of the particulars, but is simplifying the tax code something that's long overdue?
I think simplifying it is long overdue. The difficulty that they're going to have, and we went through a real push in 2013, 2014, led by Dave Camp, a Republican chair of the Ways and Means Committee. What they found when they went out to bring this to the public was that people said, great, I'll take a 15% tax rate, but I want to keep all my deductions and credits. And you have an enormous number of special interests who will jump out of literally out of the walls at members of Congress to maintain their specific area of concern, even if it doesn't make economic sense to do it, right? I mean, if you think about, if you increase the standard deduction to $24,000, you leave charitable deductions in there, right? That's going to cover 98% of Americans' interest deduction and state tax deductions. So what are we talking about here? And most people really don't meet the current threshold for taking a medical expense deduction. So I think if people sat down and did the math, as opposed to reacting viscerally to what's going to happen here, to me, they might see a different picture, but we don't often see analysis as part of the process.
And in particular in New York, taxpayers would lose being able to deduct their federal and state income tax and their property taxes.
Right, that's correct. But if you then look at what most people's number actually is, what I'm suggesting is it's very close to that. It's likely under that $24,000 number for a married couple, and maybe slightly over for other folks. But it's not going to be as much of a killer as people think, particularly if the rate's 15 or 20%. I mean, you really have to do the numbers there to see what's the actual impact. So you're getting a lot of sort of emotional reaction, but I'm not so sure that when you come down to it, people are really talking about that much.
The windfall won't be as...
No, not as great as they think.
What about the business 15%? Would a big tax break help in stimulating economic growth?
Well, that theory has not necessarily been proven and is not supported by most economists. I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about economists. They don't support the fact that that trickle-down theory that was part of Reagan and Laffer's proposal actually works. Is there some point at which it would be beneficial? I think so, but how do you then tie the reduction in tax rates to job creation? Unless you have to have job creation in order to get the tax break. And that's a little more complicated, but That's where I would be going. I have no trouble giving people a tax break if they create jobs.
It does leave potentially a huge deficit, though.
And use a huge number. And I think that's another reason why they're going to have a tough time getting it through Congress, because those 60 folks who make up the Freedom Caucus are not going to be inclined to see the deficit go up $2 or $3 trillion over 10 years.
You think it may be a tough go to get it through Congress?
Absolutely, very difficult. I think that the health bill is going to look like child's play by comparison.
Speaking of that, do you see another vote for that coming soon?
Well, right now, there's 21 Republicans who have said no. There's a list of about 40 who are undecided.
You get more than 23, and it's
over.
Dead.
It's dead. I think they're going to have a very hard time getting it on the floor. And even if they get it on the floor of the House, I think it goes nowhere in the Senate.
The first version, now the second version, I don't know how many of the particulars you've had a chance to see. Does it make improvements over Obamacare?
I don't believe that it does. I think there are things they could do that would improve Obamacare. But taking away, the pre-existing condition issue is huge. They have to find a way to deal with that, and it's more expensive to do that. But I think they've got to do that if they want to get a bill that people will support. Excuse me, the last time, I think they only had 17% support nationwide. That is an incredibly low number. But there are things that they could do. You could take segments of the population and give them different options, right? High deductible plans. I think that's fine. I, in fact, was a co-sponsor of a piece of legislation with a colleague from Nebraska, Republican colleagues from Nebraska, to basically do that. We thought that made some sense, and it would relieve some of the pressure on particularly wealthier people. But the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of the population cannot sustain a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 deductible. That just doesn't work. You have to have plans that have lower deductibles for the vast majority of the public.
Mr. Trump has signed more than 30 executive orders since taking office. That isn't necessarily uncommon for a new president, but do many of these lay the groundwork to roll back President Obama's rules and regulations, and are there some in particular that you disagree with?
Well, I think it does lay the groundwork. There's no doubt about it that they're trying to set that up. They're trying to do that by many of these executive orders saying review various pieces of legislation or rules that President Obama enacted. I disagree with a lot of particularly the environmental protection pieces. I have a friend who is a member of parliament from Alberta, and he said in a program we were doing together, I don't have a constituent who's in favor of dirty water or dirty air. And he was a very conservative member of parliament, but remember, he's a Canadian, so that's a little bit different situation. But that's very important, that we do the things that preserve clean air and clean water. The arguments that we're having about climate change, although I think climate change is a reality, I at least understand some of that because of the costs associated with it and how you need to handle that. But the clean air, clean water thing, I think, is a real mistake to allow people to essentially pollute.
Would some of the rollbacks also reverse new rules for oil trains?
It may do that. One of the things that I found really interesting was Mr. Trump was very demonstrative about the fact that he was opening up for more drilling. That's great, except the oil price is falling. So do you think somebody's going to exercise their rights to drill when they can't make any money at it? I don't think so. So it's sort of a nonsensical approach. You want to say, now I get where you're going, but with oil prices falling, our capacity to produce oil and gas increasing, where is this going? How are you creating jobs in an environment where the price of the product is declining?
Has that changed your opinion about the Keystone XL? I mean, that's one thing where you and the president are on the same page. Mm-hmm. Do you applaud the revival of that project, and do you think that should move forward?
I do. That's a little different scenario. This is Canadian oil moving to Dallas, Texas to be refined and shipped overseas, right? So it's not having any direct impact on our market other than the creation of jobs. That oil is going to get overseas, whether it comes to us for processing or it goes somewhere else. I would rather see the jobs come here.
Last year's presidential election was back in the news this week with FBI Director James Comey testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee about his handling of the politically sensitive investigations into Hillary Clinton's emails and whether any Trump associates might have worked with Russia to meddle in the presidential election. Comey defended his decision to notify Congress that he had reopened the Clinton email probe just days before the election and said it makes him, these are his words now, nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. Do you think it did?
I think he should be nauseated. I think it clearly had an impact. I think you had movement going towards Trump at that point. I think it may not have impacted the people who voted for him, but I think it impacted the people who didn't vote who would have voted for Hillary. I think it was just enough to turn that page. And I think for him to take the position that it had no impact is simply disingenuous.
Did it cost her the election?
I think it may well have.